Brewster here in an episode of Chordplay. This is the Chords of Krokus, and I've had some requests to feature some of their music. And Krokus formed in Switzerland in 1975, and their first album, Krokus, from 1976, is noticeably very different than the style of music they'd be known for in the early to mid-80s. That first Krokus album is more kind of a fusion prog-rock kind of thing, and then they slowly started to shift and move toward a melodic hard rock direction. And that's some of the music that we're going to focus on in this lesson. So if you're a Krokus fan, get ready, because we're going to hit some of their stuff pretty hard. With a band like Krokus, the guitarists that worked with the group, back in the day, in their heyday, really aren't household names. Fernando von Arb was the guitarist that kind of stayed with Krokus, through their heyday when they rose to popularity and beyond. But they also had a player in the early days, Tommy Kiefer, not to be confused with Tom Kiefer from Cinderella. That's a different guy. But Tommy Kiefer was their original player. He played on that first kind of prog rock, Krokus album. And then eventually Mark Calder came into the picture. But here's an image with some of these players so you can kind of get a visual and see what they look like. It seems like as soon as Krokus made that hard rock push, they had comparisons to ACDC, because they definitely did have a noticeable ACDC influence. Kind of the scratchy vocals, the simple prodding drums and ringing power chord riffs and stuff, very similar to AC/DC. And I did read that actually Krokus attended like a late 70s AC/DC concert, and they were so blown away and impressed they actually started to change their style, and that came from members of Krokus. Also, the singer Mark Storis almost became AC/DC's vocalist after Bon Scott passed away. He didn't actually audition, but AC/DC and Krokus shared a production company, and the production company approached Mark like, hey, you should be the new singer in AC/DC. But here's an image with a quote from Mark kind of explaining what happened. And the music in this lesson is going to come from a variety of different Krokus albums, and I definitely wanted to target something from that first album. If you know me and my interest in prog rock and kind of fusion-y, 70s music, when I discovered that they actually had this experimental proggy, album that was first, that's exactly where I went to, first. And of course I was already familiar with the Blitz and, and Headhunter and some of these albums, but I'd never heard that first Krokus album until, I put this lesson together. So if you're curious like I was, stick around, and at the end we're going to look at something from that first record. So here we go. Or with the opening, that's Midnite Maniac from the album The Blitz, and I've actually used this song in private lessons for years with students because it's very easy. It's a simple song, but it definitely has some attitude and aggression, and it rocks like this. Right there in the beginning, you're basically playing one-string arpeggios. There's E major right here. That's E, G sharp, and B right there on the low E string. And then do the same thing on the A. There's A, C sharp, and E. So there's A major right there. Go to the D string and do the same thing. There's D, F sharp, and A. So there's D major. And when you get back down to that A string, you're going to let that low E kind of ring kind of funny. Actually a great workout for your pinky, for these fingers, because if you're having trouble using your pinky finger, that's a good warm-up or exercise, that happens to also be a riff. Right there, you're doing it 4 times, and the 4th time you're going to stop on the A string and then come down a D power chord, A power chord to an E power chord right there. Very AC/DC-esque. Let that low E ring, and then just start banging on that low E string like this. right there, just start banging on that low E, you know, after an E power chord. And then you're playing A over C sharp, and you're going to slide that C sharp to D, and that just changes it to a D5 right there. Basically do that slide into D5 twice right there. And then right there after the second time, just play that A over C sharp. And then a B power chord right there. Grab that low G note right there to the low E open, and then you're going to grab the B and the high E for an implied E5 right there. Just think of Bang-A-Gong Get It On, you know, for that sound. Very simple song, but it rocks. Next up is Smelly Nellie from the Hardwire album, and this totally has an ACDC thing happening like this. So you're starting with this slid, it's kind of an implied G flat 5 because you're moving in and grabbing that D flat right there. So after you do that little slide, it's actually a good kind of slide or shift for your pinky right there. So you're doing that slide into the flat 5 and then just go back to that C5 over G technically. Like that. And then a partial G5 to F5 to G5, those fourths. And then do it again. And then for the change, just go to C minor right there. So it's C minor, and those partial chords, so there's like a partial C5 to B flat 5 back to C5, and then you hear that B flat A to G, and then back to that C minor. Up next is Heatstrokes from the Metal Rendezvous album, and it's something like this. Right there, you're basically playing an A power chord, and then you're flirting with the minor and major third right there, that C and C sharp and that E. Kind of doing that hammer on, you know, from C to C sharp. And do that A power chord again, and now you're going to target the flat 5 to the 5 to the flat 7, that E flat E to G right there. So you're doing the same chord, but you're alternating between those two single note riffs right there. And right there, the guitar actually just plays an A power chord and kind of strums it a couple times. Bass is doing that, you know, steady eighth, you know, kind of prodding open A right there. So I kind of added that with the riff earlier. Really, the guitar's just, you know, playing a ringing A right there. And right there you're doing this G5 to a D over F sharp to that G5. And you'll find that a lot in Krokus's music, this kind of, you know, moving the root note down. We saw that in the previous example. And there we are in G doing the same thing. Like that, using that G5 and that D over F sharp right there. Here's another AC/DC inspired riff. This is Long Stick Goes Boom from the album One Vice at a Time, and this totally, once again, sounds like AC/DC, like this. So it really just starts with this A, and you're playing, you know, an A octave, technically, the low A open and that A on the 7th fret, and you're hearing that kind of riff. When you hear that A move down to a G, and right back to A. After that runs its course, then you're playing a D over F sharp, or I'm sorry, you're playing D over A right there, because that A is ringing right there. But it's a D over F sharp shape right there, like that, but you know, keep that low A in there. And then it's really just G5 over A, back to that D over A, back to an A right there. Next up is the song Celebration, the opening track from the Hardwire album, and this is magically now my favorite Krokus song. I honestly wasn't familiar with this until I started putting this lesson together, and I thought, why have I never heard Celebration before? It's really cool. But we're basically starting with this quiet, you know, 2-chord progression, D major, and then it's G minor over D, and then back to D major, and it's real quiet, like that. Verse starts right there, and you could also think of that second chord as a D augmented sus4 right there, if you wanted to. The easy way would just be G minor over D. So after you go back and forth there, D, G minor over D, back to D. After it does that a few times, you hear the guitar kind of gradually get a little louder in the background. You hear a pick scrape, and then an A power chord. Everything stops, 2 C5s, and then you just hear, you know, D5 to that G minor over D, or you could think of that as D augmented there. It's very simple, but that's a really good song. And when I was listening to it, I thought, man, how have I never heard this song before? And I really like that progression, even though it's really simple. But I like that, you know, progression between D major and G minor. So that major 1 and a minor 4 chord. And we've talked about that on this channel a lot, as far as what that does. It's kind of a modal progression. But I definitely like that chord progression. Alright, let's get weird. This is Mostsaphin from the first Krokus album, and it's this really strange single note riff that's harmonized. And while we don't have any chords necessarily, there is this really interesting finality that's being implied. Kind of a B13, sharp 11. He's also kind of flirting with the major and minor 3rd. So it's really unusual, but it's something like this. first guitar, and it's basically, like I said, kind of implying like a B13 sharp 11, kind of. And you're also kind of playing with the major and minor third. So right there it's B, F, which is the flat 5 of B, and then the octave of B. And then you're playing with the A right there, that flat 7. And then moving D to D sharp, the minor to major third. So there's the first part. And then start it again. And right there, grab that G, G sharp, this D, and that B note. So you put it all together. That with the TC Electronic Ditto Looper, and then when guitar 2 comes in, it basically plays the exact same thing up a minor third, so you're harmonizing thirds, and now it's kind of like an implied D 13 sharp 11 like this. And the same lick we had right here, but then harmonized it sounds really wicked like this. And I think the bass actually comes in and starts harmonizing too. But check Mostsaphin out. It's really an unusual song and sounds nothing like later, Krokus from the 80s. All right, that's going to wrap this episode of Chordplay with the Chords of Krokus. And I have to admit, when I saw some requests kind of, filter in for Krokus, I was kind of caught off guard. I wasn't expecting people to ask for Krokus. And I thought, yeah, let's go there because, it's a band that I remember. I do remember when I was a kid, I had the Blitz on cassette. I think I bought it at a gas station for like $2 or $3 and it was cheap. And it wasn't new at that time. It was in the bargain bin at that time. But I remember I had a couple bucks and I thought, yeah, I've heard of this Krokus band. They were probably popping up in like a Metal Edge magazine or Rip or Circus or one of those magazines I read that wasn't a guitar magazine. But I knew the name, I just didn't know the music. And as soon as I bought it and listened to it, I thought, yeah, it kind of sounds a little bit like ACDC, but I liked it. And I still do. And like I mentioned earlier, when I discovered that Krokus actually had a prog rock album from the 70s, I dove into that like a swimming pool. I was like, what is this? I have to hear this. Different lineup, different style of music, but still very interesting, where it's like, wow, that's where they started? And then you notice like where they went, as the 70s moved into the 80s, which is so cool. Anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Maniac Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.